Thinking quickly, One Eye suddenly invented an excuse, claiming that Levi and Jasper were actually his illegitimate sons, emphasizing that the bond between a father and his children was something that could never be severed. The commander froze in shock when he heard that statement, unsure whether the man was telling the truth or fabricating an outrageous lie. With remarkable acting skill, One Eye continued his performance, even letting tears well up in his eyes as he explained that if Levi and Jasper stayed behind at headquarters, they would feel abandoned by their own father. The entire room fell silent as One Eye's dramatic display created an unexpectedly emotional atmosphere. The commander stared at him thoughtfully, considering the claim that One Eye was truly their guardian. In truth, Levi and Jasper's backgrounds had never been thoroughly investigated. At that moment, the commander finally began to understand why the boys seemed to have such a strong attachment to returning home. Still unsure, he cautiously asked whether Levi and Jasper were actually brothers, noting that their surnames were completely different. Without even pausing to think, One Eye quickly lied again, claiming they had simply inherited their mother's family name instead. The commander glanced down at Jasper's personal file and noticed that it strangely lacked basic details such as his exact age or birth date, which only made the situation more suspicious. Sweat began pouring down One Eye's face as he tried desperately to remember convincing details. Suddenly, the commander slammed his hand on the table, angrily accusing him of being a reckless womanizer. One Eye hurriedly pretended innocence, admitting his past carelessness while proudly adding that despite their unusual origins, the two boys were extraordinary combat geniuses. He went on to say that regardless of how they were born, Levi and Jasper were still young and needed their father's guidance and care. Watching the emotional performance unfold, the commander finally stepped back with a reluctant sigh. With obvious disgust in his eyes, he admitted that there was little choice but to allow Levi and Jasper to return to Yanhai City instead of forcing them to remain in the capital. However, since the current evaluation equipment could not accurately measure Levi's true strength, the commander decided to keep this information confidential. He added that if One Eye agreed, Levi would still be required to respond if the country ever summoned him to defend headquarters. One Eye immediately nodded in agreement, promising confidently that there would be absolutely no problems. At that very moment, someone suddenly used their authority to enter the room where One Eye and the Supreme Commander were speaking privately. Still unaware of the newcomer's presence, One Eye continued reassuring the commander that protecting headquarters was the same as protecting the nation itself, and that Levi would never refuse such a responsibility. Without realizing someone else had already entered, One Eye kept talking and repeated that Levi and Jasper were his illegitimate sons, even asking the commander to keep that information strictly confidential. Inside, the commander cursed One Eye for being such a shameless womanizer, but in the end he reluctantly agreed to the arrangement. Suddenly, the man who had entered the room could not help speaking up. With obvious surprise, he remarked that the famous combat genius was apparently the illegitimate child of One Eye. One Eye turned suspiciously and asked who the man was. The elegant red-haired stranger calmly introduced himself as Stefan, one of the 13 general-level elders of headquarters and one of the 5 Supreme Realm experts stationed permanently at Jin Fortress. Stefan also happened to be the future head of the powerful Jin family. Hearing this name, One Eye immediately realized that Stefan was Joseph's younger brother, which also meant that he was Tracy's father. Trembling slightly, One Eye nervously extended his hand to shake Stefan's. However, Stefan's next words shocked him deeply. With a faint smile, he hinted that because of those two brilliant, illegitimate sons, One Eye's reputation was probably ruined forever, and he might never find a wife now. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the garden where Lion had once met privately with his commander. After hearing from Ye that Levi had reached the supreme combat rank and was allowed to return to Yanhai without staying at headquarters, Lion curiously asked how the commander had agreed to such a decision. Cases explained that the one-eyed man had boldly claimed Levi and Jasper were his illegitimate sons. Lion frowned slightly, unsure whether the one-eyed man had spoken the truth or simply invented another lie, considering his reputation as a shameless womanizer. After thinking for a moment, Cases suggested launching an attack using the evil artifact to destroy Yanhai City while taking the opportunity to eliminate One Eye and Tracy. Lion nodded grimly, pointing out that they were still holding Sam's corpse. If they did not destroy those two soon, the secret might eventually be exposed. Cases proposed persuading certain demons to take action, since only they possessed the strength necessary to kill supreme-level warriors. Layan muttered something under his breath that caught Cases' attention. Cases was left speechless when he heard Layan angrily complain about the one-eyed man fathering two illegitimate children despite already being 40 years old. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, the rooster was grumbling angrily that Levi and Jasper had gone to the combat evaluation without inviting him along. Eventually, he decided the situation had one advantage. It gave him the perfect excuse to take a long, comfortable nap. Just as the rooster jumped onto the bed to begin his legendary afternoon sleep, Jasper's loud voice suddenly rang out and rudely woke him up. The rooster angrily crowed at the two of them for ruining his rest, loudly questioning whether they even had basic human decency. At the same time, the twins returned to the special district of Shinfeng City. The residents welcomed them warmly, celebrating them as heroes who had completed an extremely dangerous S-rank mission. From that day forward, the twins were no longer considered an embarrassment but a great pride of the entire city. Feeling embarrassed by all the praise, Giselle quietly whispered to Julian that she felt awkward hearing everyone call them heroes. Julian simply shrugged and replied irritably that there was nothing to be embarrassed about. The two of them smiled politely and waved to the cheering crowd around them. Soon someone noticed that Team 66 had already climbed to 16th place on the national leaderboard, shocking many people since they had joined the Special Forces only a few months earlier. Muttering to himself, one observer complained that the Yanhai team had spent half their lives earning points, yet Team 66 had suddenly overtaken them. While others believed the twins were the strongest team in Yanhai, he knew they were simply two unusual eccentrics with very different ways of thinking. At that moment, One Eye suddenly remembered that Levi had completed an S-rank mission, earning 10,000 points along with a prestigious national award. Meanwhile, Tracy and her uncle were already waiting nearby, after receiving One Eye's message about when he would arrive. The director of the Psychiatric Institute, Sean, spotted the two familiar figures approaching and immediately walked forward to greet them. The moment Jasper and Levi saw the director, they were so moved that they almost burst into tears as they rushed forward to hug him tightly. The director hugged them back warmly and admitted with a smile that he had missed them very much during their absence. Then he suddenly noticed the rooster standing beside them. Without hesitation, the director rushed forward and hugged the rooster as well, saying happily that he had missed him too. One Eye stood quietly to the side, watching the emotional reunion. Seeing the director's sincere affection for the boys, he finally understood why the man looked so deeply moved. The previous evening, the director had been relaxing in his office, casually watching a food review channel on his phone. Suddenly, a notification popped up from the hospital's account, informing him that 240 million had been transferred from the Special Forces headquarters. The message explained that Levi, Jasper, and Rooster had successfully completed a dangerous S-rank rescue mission. According to the official notice, each of the three participants was entitled to a national reward of 80 million as recognition for their extraordinary contribution. The director stared at the numbers in disbelief, rubbing his eyes again and again as his hands began to tremble. No matter how many times he checked, the enormous figure remained the same. In the end, he realized there was nothing else to do except wait until morning when the three heroes returned so he could greet them personally. Meanwhile, Tracy answered One Eye's earlier question about the warrior who had stayed behind to guard the city. She explained that after hearing the news that One Eye and Team 666 had safely returned to Yanhai City, the man had also boarded a plane and gone back to the security headquarters. One Eye narrowed his eye suspiciously and asked Tracy how she had managed to track him down so quickly. Tracy calmly replied that she never believed he was the traitor, since from the moment he arrived he had never left the area nor attempted to examine the corpse traces that were still hidden in his room. Leaning slightly closer, One Eye lowered his voice and quietly asked Tracy which of the four national-level experts stationed at headquarters, aside from the two of them, seemed the most suspicious in her opinion. Just as their secret conversation was about to continue, Joseph suddenly appeared nearby, interrupting them before another word could be spoken. He frowned and immediately told One Eye to keep a proper distance from his niece. Once the younger uncle stepped between them, Tracy quickly changed the subject and loudly suggested that she should continue examining Sam's corpse and report any new discoveries immediately. After that, the woman asked what they planned to do with Levi and Jasper now that everything had settled down. Joseph decided there was no urgent need to involve them any further for the moment. Instead, he suggested that they simply follow Sean back to the psychiatric hospital and get some proper rest. Sean then escorted Levi, Jasper, and Rooster back to the mental hospital. All the hospital staff had been instructed in advance to cooperate fully, and the director had already paid them generously for their assistance. At first, the staff lined up outside to welcome Levi and Jasper back warmly. However, after only 3 days, many of them secretly began wishing those troublesome patients had never returned. After arriving back at the hospital, Jasper cheerfully went around offering medical treatment to the other patients, acting as if he were the resident doctor. Meanwhile, on his very first day back, Levi secretly took a vegetable knife from the kitchen and began demonstrating his supposed resistance to pain in front of the other patients. The director simply sighed and treated it as a minor issue, knowing the two boys had always enjoyed strange and dangerous games since childhood. On the second day, Jasper borrowed the gardener's electric saw and enthusiastically suggested using it as part of Levi's muscle training routine. When the frightened gardener ran to complain, the director calmly reassured him that everything was under control. By the third day, Jasper was still diligently practicing his acupuncture techniques, while Levi continued testing his strength by punching the trees in the courtyard. Finally, the director reached the limit of his patience. Watching the chaos unfold, he worried that if this continued much longer, even 2 billion would not be enough to cover the damage they might cause. Glancing up at the rooster peacefully sleeping on a tree branch, the director quietly praised him in his heart for being the only well-behaved one among them. The rooster seemed to notice the director staring at him and shot him a disapproving look, as if annoyed by the attention. If not for those 2 troublemakers nearby, he might have chased the old man away already. At that moment, a young man and his assistant entered the hospital grounds. It was Christian accompanied by his personal aide. The director was extremely pleased to see them arrive. He secretly hoped Christian might invite Levi and Jasper away for a while. Christian noticed that the two were still wearing warrior uniforms, though he did not think much about it. Instead, he casually suggested taking them out of the city to enjoy some fresh air and have a relaxing outing. The 2 boys looked at him with confusion, not understanding why he suddenly decided to invite them along. Christian sighed quietly to himself, realizing that their unusual mental condition might make social outings difficult. So he shrugged and said that if it seemed impossible, they could simply forget the idea. The director immediately grabbed Christian's hand, unwilling to miss such a golden opportunity, and eagerly persuaded him to take the 2 boys along. He even asked whether Christian could help cover some of the expenses Levi had accidentally caused during his previous adventures outside. Christian nodded without hesitation, knowing that for his wealthy family, a little money was hardly worth worrying about. Soon afterward, Levi and Jasper were happily running through the forest, chasing butterflies and buzzing bees like excited children. Christian had taken them to a forest outside the city where a 5-star hotel chef was preparing an outdoor barbecue feast. Meanwhile, Christian relaxed comfortably on a sun lounger nearby. While wandering through the trees, Jasper suddenly noticed a dark cave entrance ahead. Curious, the two decided to explore it. High above them, several demons watching from the sky instantly realized what kind of cave that actually was. However, Levi and Jasper were completely unconcerned about any potential danger and boldly walked straight inside. Inside the cave it was dark and eerily quiet. As they walked deeper, Jasper casually hummed a cheerful tune. Deep within the cavern, a massive demonic beast suddenly caught the scent of humans drifting through the air. The creature became furious, realizing its long hibernation had been disturbed. This particular demonic beast was extremely powerful and had lived inside the cave for more than 300 years. 3 centuries earlier, it had arrived there together with its cockroach brother. Unfortunately, the entrance collapsed during a battle between its brother and humans, trapping it inside. Its brother had always been incredibly strong. After 300 years, the beast assumed the cockroach king must have conquered Yanhai and become its ruler. The demon had no idea that his brother had already died long ago. Believing these humans would be an easy meal, he decided to eat them and then search for his brother afterward. As Levi and Jasper approached, the beast grinned greedily. At the same time, a system warning appeared in Levi's mind, alerting him to the demon's immense power. The Demon King stepped forward and arrogantly told Levi that meeting him today was the greatest misfortune of his life. Hearing that threat, Levi actually began drooling with excitement and calmly announced that he had no intention of leaving. 10 minutes later, Rooster was standing nearby admiring a colorful egg in his hand when he suddenly heard Jasper calling out loudly. When he looked up, he was stunned to see the enormous demonic beast completely subdued by the two seemingly harmless boys. Startled, the rooster dropped the egg, but Isaac quickly caught it before it could hit the ground. The captured bull demon suddenly recognized the rooster and realized they belonged to the same demonic lineage. With tears in his eyes, the bull demon begged the rooster to save him. The rooster sadly replied that he could do nothing, scolding the demon for foolishly choosing the wrong cave. Meanwhile, the cockroach spirit watched his brother's death from afar, sadness filling his eyes. When the Bull King's soul rose from his body, he finally saw his brother, the Cockroach King, waiting nearby. The two brothers rushed toward each other and embraced tightly, crying as they shared their sorrow after centuries of separation. As night fell, Levi's group happily enjoyed the rich aroma of roasting wild ox meat over the fire. The rooster slowly chewed a skewer of Demon King meat and quietly wished his unfortunate relative a peaceful journey to the afterlife. Tears rolled down his feathers while Christian's assistant politely asked whether he wanted to sprinkle a little pepper on it. The rooster nodded immediately, saying that seasoning would definitely improve the flavor of his relative's meat. On the second day of their journey through the outskirts, a demonic owl watched the people below from the sky, thinking food had conveniently arrived on its own. Later, the rooster held a delicious roasted owl in his claws and justified the situation by saying the creature had simply been too foolish. On the third day, while wandering through the forest again, Levi suddenly noticed a small and rather adorable snake nearby. Meanwhile, the rooster calmly prepared another skewer of meat while scolding the snake for being so careless around hungry travelers. On the fourth day of wandering through the wild lands nearby, the boar demon finally returned to his cave. After a long day of roaming around, he settled into his den with a satisfied grunt, stretching his heavy body across the ground. Feeling completely relaxed and safe inside his territory, he slowly closed his eyes, ready to drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. Levi and Jasper quietly crept closer after spotting the chubby boar sleeping so comfortably. The sight of the round creature made Levi grin, and he casually remarked that the boar actually looked kind of cute. Hearing this, the boar demon woke up trembling, tears welling in his eyes as he pitifully begged for mercy, swearing again and again that he would never dare eat another human. Meanwhile, the rooster slowly enjoyed the rich flavor of roasted boar meat, savoring every bite with clear satisfaction. As he chewed lazily, he also realized something unfortunate. Because he had grown too relaxed and sleepy earlier, his fate had already been sealed without him noticing. More unlucky creatures soon joined the earlier victims. Watching this happen, the rooster casually complained that the rabbit had only himself to blame. After all, growing up looking so plump, soft, and deliciously beautiful was practically inviting trouble. Then he glanced at the frog and shrugged dismissively. According to him, the frog's real mistake was the opposite. It had simply grown up far too ugly, making it impossible for anyone to feel sorry for it. As for the salmon, the rooster sighed as if explaining something obvious. The poor fish had only one real crime in this world. It just happened to have incredibly tasty meat. Another quiet night passed, and by the next evening the rooster had already finished devouring the demonic creatures that once lived around the outskirts of the region, leaving almost nothing behind. As it turned out, those meals were not wasted. After consuming so many powerful beings, he had successfully evolved into a continental-ranked demon. Not only had his strength increased dramatically, but he had also inherited many of the special abilities belonging to the creatures he had devoured. When the Cockroach Demon King and the Rooster Demon King witnessed this unbelievable scene, they were so shocked and furious that their faces twisted in disbelief. The sight of the rooster's overwhelming transformation was so overwhelming that both of them fainted on the spot. Not long after all of this chaos, everyone finally returned back to the city, as if nothing unusual had happened. Christian, who had been eating nothing but wild game for days, had clearly grown tired of it. With a friendly smile, he invited Levi to join him for a proper dinner before they eventually headed home. The group soon walked into a restaurant that looked noticeably more expensive than the usual places they visited. The decorations were elegant, and the atmosphere gave the impression that only wealthy customers normally ate there. While they were sitting down, Levi suddenly told Jasper that he had just spotted someone familiar. It was that same kind-hearted girl they had met before, Sophia. After watching carefully for a moment, they realized what was happening. Sophia had come to the restaurant hoping to get a job, but unfortunately the manager had already rejected her request. Just as she was about to leave the restaurant with a disappointed expression, Levi and Jasper quickly called out to her from behind. Hearing her name, the girl turned around in surprise. When she recognized her two old friends standing there, her eyes widened with genuine shock. Jasper cheerfully introduced her to Christian, explaining that this girl was actually their friend. He even mentioned how she had once kindly treated them to an incredibly delicious meal. Sophia admitted a little shyly that she still hadn't been able to find a job yet. Even so, she forced a small smile and said she didn't want to worry too much about it. After hearing her situation, Christian immediately offered a solution. He mentioned that his house still needed someone to help with cleaning and asked if she might be interested in giving it a try. Sophia stood there in disbelief for a moment. She simply couldn't believe that such unexpected good fortune had suddenly fallen into her life. When she heard about the generous salary and the benefits that came with the job, the blonde girl became visibly excited and quickly accepted Christian's offer without hesitation. Christian's assistant then politely asked her to leave her phone number so they could contact her later and discuss the details more clearly. Overwhelmed with gratitude, the blonde girl bowed deeply to Christian. She repeatedly thanked him and promised sincerely that she would work very hard. However, Levi watched this entire exchange with a puzzled look on his face. For some reason, he simply couldn't understand why the girl seemed so unbelievably happy. Meanwhile, while the two troublemakers continued causing chaos somewhere else, Deputy Director Lee at the hospital was actually in a very good mood. Since Levi and Jasper had not appeared for quite a while, the hospital environment had become peaceful and pleasant. At one point, he even let out a quiet sigh of relief. A strange thought crossed his mind. Whenever he imagined that those two might already be dead somewhere, he felt strangely calm. But the moment he realized what he had just thought, the doctor froze. As someone sworn to save lives, he immediately slapped himself across the face as punishment for allowing such dark thoughts to appear. Then he reminded himself of something important. After all, thanks to Levi and Jasper, the hospital had actually received a large amount of funding. Thinking carefully about it, he concluded that his guilty conscience was probably the reason for his discomfort. To calm himself down, he decided to go pray and burn some incense. Just as he finished lighting the incense, a loud and familiar voice suddenly shouted from behind him. It was Jasper announcing his arrival. The moment Old Man Lee heard that voice, his face instantly turned furious. Without hesitation, he pinched out the incense and threw it angrily onto the ground, declaring that from now on he would never bother praying again. When Levi and Jasper approached him, Jasper cheerfully said that it had been a long time since they had last seen each other. He even added that he missed Lee, which was why they came to visit. Old Man Lee forced a bitter smile while thanking them for the visit. Although he looked touched on the surface, he treated the two troublemakers more like mischievous puppies and politely asked them to leave. He personally placed them into a car, waved goodbye with a stiff smile, and watched them drive away. Inside the moving car, the two boys happily waved back to him. But only a few seconds later, Lee suddenly froze. A strange realization hit him. Something about that situation felt terribly wrong. When Christian later arrived, the hospital director warmly thanked him for taking care of Levi and Jasper during the past few days. However, he also felt a bit uneasy, worrying that Christian might simply decide not to bring them back at all. Because of this fear, the director gathered all the newly hired staff members and issued a very strict order. Under no circumstances were they allowed to let the two boys leave their sight for even 5 seconds. One of the new nurses nervously raised her hand and asked what would happen if they accidentally lost sight of the boys for more than 5 seconds. The director immediately replied that they must contact him without delay. Right after saying this, he quickly began organizing a full search throughout the hospital building. At that moment, a nurse suddenly shouted loudly for the director to come over. She reported with panic in her voice that more than 5 seconds had already passed, and Levi and Jasper were nowhere to be found. The director looked around the area, his face slowly turning pale as he realized the terrible truth. The 2 boys had completely disappeared. Immediately, he shouted for everyone in the hospital to gather and organize a search team to find them as quickly as possible. At that exact moment, the 2 boys had already reached the rooftop of the psychiatric hospital, standing near the tall lightning rod installed there. Levi calmly explained that the professor had predicted there would be a thunderstorm today. Because of that, he wanted to use the lightning and thunder as a way to train. Jasper looked doubtful, reminding him that the watch seller had once exposed the professor as a mental patient, meaning his words might not be trustworthy. Levi quickly added another detail. According to the professor, the watch seller himself was also mentally ill and had been selling fake watches the entire time. The 2 boys stared at each other in confusion, realizing that they had absolutely no idea which person they should actually believe. Jasper suddenly asked what would happen if both of those men were mentally ill. Levi frowned thoughtfully and said that TV programs always warned that mental illness could be dangerous, so maybe it would be safer to stay away from both of them. Just then, a loud clap of thunder exploded across the sky. Levi's eyes widened instantly as he realized that the professor's prediction had actually been correct. Excitedly, he pointed toward the flashing lightning and rolling thunder, eagerly showing Jasper the storm that was beginning to form. Jasper sighed sadly and muttered that from now on he would probably stop buying watches from that suspicious seller. Levi watched the powerful lightning with awe shining in his eyes. He couldn't stop talking about how incredibly strong it looked and insisted that he needed to start training immediately. Jasper nodded in support, saying that once Levi finished cultivating, he would become even more powerful. However, just as Levi stepped closer to the lightning rod, a group of hospital staff suddenly rushed onto the roof, desperately trying to stop the boys from doing anything dangerous. Seeing the staff running toward them, Jasper immediately made up his mind. As Levi's best friend, he believed he could not allow anyone to interrupt Levi's cultivation at such a crucial moment. 3 paramedics hurried toward Levi, but suddenly one of them froze in place. With a trembling hand, she slowly pointed at Jasper, her face filled with fear. Jasper casually waved goodbye to her and began running away from the doctors, heading straight toward the very edge of the rooftop. To the medical workers watching the scene, what they were witnessing felt like a complete nightmare unfolding right before their eyes. One of them screamed loudly for Jasper to stop moving, but in that moment he slipped, lost his balance, and began falling off the edge. Fortunately, a nurse reacted instantly. She lunged forward and grabbed his shoulder just in time, then quickly called 2 nearby colleagues to help pull him back up. The 3 of them struggled together to drag Jasper back to safety. While catching their breath, they complained nervously that once this was over, they would definitely need to ask the principal for a salary raise after dealing with such terrifying situations. A sudden, explosive crash of thunder erupted behind them, so loud and violent that it seemed to shake the air itself. The terrifying sound made the 3 paramedics freeze where they stood, their bodies going rigid as the hair on the backs of their necks prickled with fear. When they slowly turned around and looked into the distance, they spotted Levi standing there completely still. His entire body looked charred and blackened, like something that had just been struck by lightning. From where they stood, they couldn't tell if he was still breathing or if he had already lost his life. One of their co-workers nervously urged them to inform the director right away before anything worse happened. The 2 male paramedics hurriedly patted down their pockets, digging through them in a panic, only to realize with growing embarrassment that both of them had somehow forgotten to bring their phones. Seeing their helpless expressions, the nurse quickly pulled out her own phone. The 2 men leaned closer, anxiously urging her to hurry and make the call, insisting that the director needed to come to the scene immediately to deal with whatever had just happened. But just as the nurse was about to dial, all 3 of them suddenly froze. A terrible realization dawned on their faces at the same time. They had completely forgotten about the fact that they had been holding Jasper's hand when he started falling earlier. Slowly, almost in disbelief, the three paramedics lowered their heads and looked down. Sure enough, Jasper was no longer being held by anyone. He was plummeting through the air, falling freely toward the ground because they had forgotten about him in the chaos. As the wind rushed past his ears, Jasper thought bitterly that this was probably how his life would end. Yet just when everything seemed hopeless and the ground was rushing closer, a massive rooster suddenly appeared out of nowhere, swooping in at the last second to save the boy's life. With perfect timing, Jasper landed safely on the broad, feathered back of the giant bird, gripping tightly as the rooster steadied itself in midair. Watching from above, the three paramedics gasped in disbelief and then burst into relieved shouts. One of them excitedly cried out that the bird had caught him, while the other sighed with overwhelming relief that Jasper hadn't smashed into the ground. The nurse stared down at the large bird with wide eyes and couldn't help admiring how majestic and beautiful it looked. Still, she frowned slightly and muttered that something about the bird felt strangely familiar, as if she had seen it somewhere before. After thinking for a moment, the nurse suddenly remembered and explained that the creature raised in room 666 was the demonic beast the director had introduced earlier. The moment the realization hit her, her face turned pale as if all the blood had drained away. She suddenly recalled how she had once scolded this exact chicken for constantly shaking the tree and making leaves fall everywhere in the yard. Two nurses quickly grabbed the stunned girl by the hands to steady her while they discussed Levi's condition. They wondered whether they should rush him to the hospital, since he looked almost burned to ashes. Strangely, though, someone mentioned that he also smelled oddly appetizing. Unsure what to do, they decided the safest option was to contact the director again and wait for instructions. Meanwhile, the story shifts back to the hospital. Lee had already suspected that something troublesome might happen the moment he decided to send those two men away earlier. As he thought about it more carefully, the man suddenly realized what had seemed so strange about those so-called mentally ill patients he encountered that day. After opening the car door, Lee turned toward Sean and asked him directly why those people had been wearing Special Forces uniforms. He added that if mentally unstable individuals could somehow become that powerful, their entire city might soon face serious trouble. Hearing this, Sean quickly leaned over and covered Lee's mouth with his hand, nervously whispering that they were nothing more than cosplayers playing dress-up. Lee pushed Sean's hand away with an annoyed expression and calmly replied that their hospital had treated plenty of injured Special Forces soldiers before. Because of that, he could easily tell the difference between a real military uniform and a cheap imitation. Trying to calm the situation, Sean awkwardly changed the topic. He casually pointed out that Levi had simply gotten sunburned and joked that Lee had always been overly picky when it came to clothing and appearances. But Lee refused to back down so easily. He continued questioning Sean, pointing out that this wasn't even the first time Levi had been burned like that. With narrowed eyes, he asked why Sean was acting so strangely surprised. Sean turned his face away as if he knew nothing about the paperwork Lee mentioned. He mumbled that he had nothing more to say, but Lee kept pressing him harder, asking whether Sean truly planned to let mentally unstable people secretly work within the Special Forces. Leaning closer, Sean quietly whispered a number, 500,000. Lee immediately refused the offer and reminded Sean about their shared past. Back when Sean was the top student, Lee clearly remembered how passionately Sean had once promised that together they would develop and improve the country's psychiatric field. Grinding his teeth, Sean reluctantly raised the offer to 1 million. Old Lee stood there stunned for a moment, silently calculating the costs of legally registering Levi and Jasper for work. Judging by his thoughtful expression, it almost looked like he was considering squeezing even more money out of Sean. Finally, Lee asked calmly just how much Sean was willing to pay in order for Levi and Jasper to legally work with the Special Forces. This time Sean stopped holding back. He looked Lee straight in the eyes and bluntly asked him how much more money he actually wanted. After hearing that, Lee slowly nodded and settled on the figure of 1 million. He even added that their hospital currently lacked enough funding to perform certain emergency life-saving surgeries. At that exact moment, Lee's phone suddenly rang. On the other end, the deputy director excitedly informed him that their project had just received a sponsorship worth $1 million. Lee ended the call, then turned back toward Sean with a faint smile. He told him that he would handle the payment for Levi and Jasper's legal employment with the Special Forces, adding that it wasn't really about the $1 million. It was about the trust he still had in his best student. Meanwhile, the deputy director felt as though money was slipping through his fingers faster than he could count it. He laughed awkwardly to himself and quickly apologized, explaining that he hadn't meant to say things in that way earlier. After resting for an entire day, Levi finally woke up from surgery. The moment he opened his eyes, a glowing system notification appeared before him, congratulating him for successfully cultivating to S rank. Levi had obtained a new ability called the Thunder Absorption Body. This power doubled the speed at which he could absorb natural energy and even allowed him to open spatial realms. The system asked if he wanted to immediately travel to a new dimension to continue leveling up. When Levi hesitated, the system quietly repeated the question once again. After a brief moment of thought, Levi suddenly spoke up and firmly said that he would not move to the new location for now. Outside in the corridor, a nurse walked along the hallway and noticed something unusual. Every single patient seemed to be behaving incredibly well today. She smiled to herself, thinking that it might turn out to be another peaceful and pleasant day at the hospital. But the moment she glanced into Levi's room and saw him climbing onto the windowsill, clearly preparing to jump outside, that peaceful feeling shattered instantly. Standing on the edge of the window, Levi calmly said his goodbyes. With a quiet voice, he explained that today he needed to travel somewhere very far away. The nurse gasped in shock, dropping the folders she was holding. Papers scattered across the floor as she rushed forward and shouted for the other nurses to come help immediately. Soon a panicked group of nurses surrounded the window, each one desperately trying to persuade Levi not to jump. One younger nurse managed to grab onto his leg, while another begged him to think about his parents before making such a terrible decision. They kept pleading with him, insisting that no matter how serious his illness was, as long as he could still breathe, there was hope. Levi stared blankly at them, just as a voice suddenly called out from outside the window. It was Jasper, flying outside while riding on the back of a giant rooster. Levi casually remarked that he had actually tried riding a chicken once as well. Hearing that comment, the rooster's expression instantly turned awkward and pale. Jasper looked equally confused, wondering why he had to suffer through his friend's ridiculous joke. By the next day, rumors began spreading across the internet claiming that a patient had jumped from the hospital building. A reporter soon arrived to interview the nurses, who nervously explained that they had tried to stop him but couldn't pull him back because he had already stuck his legs out the window. The reporter mocked the nurses and even called them crazy. However, after a proper investigation, it turned out that not a single patient had actually jumped. The nurses and orderlies quickly defended themselves, insisting they weren't lying. A patient from their ward had indeed disappeared and had still not returned. That night, Levi had climbed out of the hospital window and jumped down toward the ground below. Seeing this, the rooster immediately dove downward in an attempt to catch Levi before he crashed. Without even thinking about the risk, the rooster flapped its wings harder and flew even higher into the air. Meanwhile, Levi stretched his arms slightly and simply enjoyed the cool, refreshing night air. To him, the feeling was incredibly comfortable, far more pleasant than sitting inside an airplane. At that moment, Isaac crawled out from the rooster's neck locket and handed Jasper a set of clothes so that Levi could change. The main character quickly changed into his warrior uniform, adjusting it neatly. Levi then jokingly suggested that Jasper should also stand up and enjoy the view. Jasper, however, was stunned by the idea and immediately felt that it sounded incredibly dangerous. Jasper nervously said he might fall, but Levi reassured him with a smile, promising that if they did fall, he would grab him and hold on tightly. Hearing that, Jasper relaxed a little and admitted that he trusted Levi. The two young men stretched out their arms and held hands dramatically, just like the famous scene from the movie Titanic. Below them, the dazzling night view of the city appeared like a sea of lights. Jasper looked down in amazement and said the scenery strangely felt familiar to him. He exclaimed that it almost felt like he had flown through the sky like this before. Hearing that nonsense, the rooster grew irritated and complained that these two fools actually thought they had wings like him. Far above them in the sky, a powerful energy wave belonging to a national-ranked demon slowly spread across the clouds. The demon rats nearby also sensed this powerful energy pulse. They quietly remarked that demons of national rank could even coexist with humans and sometimes were treated like pets. The rooster didn't dare resist such a powerful presence and simply allowed the two humans to remain seated on his back. Meanwhile, the rats decided that the powerful demon should know they belonged to the peaceful faction that wanted to coexist with humans. Of course, if that happened, they would no longer be able to secretly eat people to increase their levels. Elsewhere, the monkey demon Gargamel looked up and suddenly recognized the rooster flying high overhead. Realizing it was his old comrade along with two human friends, he chirped in surprise, amazed that his rooster brother had already risen to the powerful level of a city-state being. Even though the monkey lived deep underground most of the time, he still knew about the non-aggression agreement that had been made between humans and demonic beasts in the city of Kongshur. That fragile pact had brought the world one small step closer to the peaceful future his mother had always dreamed about. Sadly, outside the safety of the city walls, most evil beasts still followed their old instincts. They hunted humans without hesitation and constantly fought among themselves for territory and strength. Just as the monkey was lost in thought, the kidnapper's brother suddenly reached out and flicked him on the head. The sharp tap snapped him back to reality. With an annoyed tone, the man scolded him for standing there daydreaming and told him to stop being lazy and get back to work immediately. The monkey blinked in confusion, clearly not understanding what was going on around him. Meanwhile, the boy impatiently urged his brother to hurry up and finish whatever task they were doing, complaining that they were wasting too much time standing around. High above the city, Levi was still casually sitting on the giant rooster's back, enjoying the strange but thrilling experience of flying through the night sky as they circled over the glowing lights of the city below. On the streets beneath them, Smudge was walking alongside his owner Elsa when he suddenly noticed the enormous rooster flying overhead. Seeing such a powerful demonic beast moving freely through the sky made him strangely happy. To him, it meant that even powerful city-state level demons were beginning to accept peaceful coexistence with humans. He quietly hoped that more demons might one day agree to try living that way too. When Elsa noticed that Smudge had suddenly stopped walking and was looking around cautiously, she asked him what was wrong. Smudge quickly replied that nothing unusual had happened. Then, glancing at the dark sky, he suggested that they should head home soon since it was already getting quite late. After confirming that no one else was around to see, Smudge's body suddenly began to grow. In a moment, he transformed into a towering giant so that he could easily carry his owner all the way home. Elsa quickly climbed up onto Smudge's broad back with a practiced movement. As she settled in comfortably, she admired the special collar around his neck. It was an advanced form of a demon leash that could expand in size, control his movements if necessary, and even track his location. The girl gently buried her fingers in Smudge's thick fur, clearly enjoying how soft and warm it felt. Smudge, sensing that his mistress was tired, hurried toward home with long, steady strides so she could rest sooner. That same night, Sean lay awake in his room, unable to sleep at all. Besides the $1 million he had already handed over to Director Lee, Levi's medical treatment had also cost him tens of thousands more. With a tired sigh, Sean stared at the ceiling and wondered when Levi would finally recover this time. Lately, it honestly felt like treating Levi was just draining valuable medical resources and manpower. While he was still lost in these frustrating thoughts, a strange shadow suddenly appeared outside the window. The silhouette clearly looked like the shape of a giant rooster. When Sean walked closer and realized that two of his patients were standing outside the window, he nearly dropped the cup of tea in his hand. The sight of those two familiar troublemakers made him feel like crying out of pure exhaustion. Trying to maintain his authority, Sean angrily ordered the boys to go to bed immediately and stop causing trouble in the middle of the night. Obediently, the two boys lay down on the grass under the open sky, using the ground as their bed as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Early the next morning, when Sean walked outside and saw them still lying there exactly where they had fallen asleep, he felt a wave of helpless frustration. After all, he had told them to sleep, but he certainly hadn't told them to sleep outside on the grass. He turned around as if he was about to leave them there. But after taking a few steps, he stopped. With a quiet sigh, he realized he was worried they might catch a cold. After searching around for a moment, he found a blanket and gently covered them. In truth, the director had stayed awake the entire night, keeping an eye on those two sleeping fools. Sean looked down at them with a complicated expression and muttered resentfully, wondering why no one had come to take them away yet. Over the past few days, Sean felt as if time itself had slowed to a painful crawl. He had never experienced days passing so slowly before. Hearing the director complain like this, the assistant standing beside him couldn't help feeling a little bitter. After working at the psychiatric hospital for an entire month, he had only been given 4 days off in total. He glanced over at Levi, who was still sleeping soundly nearby. At that moment, the system quietly reminded its host that the otherworld stage was still waiting to be unlocked. Today was the final deadline to complete the quest connected to that stage, which promised extremely valuable cultivation resources. Watching Levi sleep so peacefully without any urgency made the system feel strangely exhausted. Then suddenly, a new idea appeared. Perhaps it could lure Jasper into entering the otherworld stage, just as its earlier predictions had suggested. The moment that thought was mentioned, the protagonist's eyes snapped open instantly, as if he had been waiting for something like that. Levi immediately sat up with renewed energy and said he was willing to try. However, the system warned him carefully that it could only bind Jasper as a host if he failed to pass through the connection to the other world. Levi reached over and shook Jasper awake before explaining the system's strange proposal to him. Jasper was still half asleep, rubbing his eyes while Levi described the plan about entering another world. Even so, he didn't hesitate for long. With a lazy smile, Jasper agreed immediately, saying that he was ready to face any crazy adventure as long as Levi was going with him. The two boys sat beneath a large tree. Levi told Jasper that for this to work, they needed to hold hands tightly and close their eyes together. Soon after, the system's calm voice echoed in their minds, announcing that the otherworld scene had begun changing and that the carrier had started entering the new realm. The system further explained that their current world would temporarily enter a frozen state. As those words faded, both boys slowly closed their eyes. The only way to escape that frozen state would be to complete a mission in the other world. Their task would be to help Levi, the descendant of the god of war, restore the strength and honor of his family within the city of Manching. The system warned that since this was the first time it had tried to establish contact with this foreign world, unusual situations might occur, so they needed to remain patient. Yet surprisingly, the connection formed almost instantly, and Levi and Jasper slowly began drifting into the new otherworld scene. Not only Jasper, but even the rooster he was holding in his arms was pulled into the strange illusion of the other world along with them. At that moment, the story shifted to the headquarters of the Manching City Martial Arts Association. A violent group suddenly stormed into the headquarters building. Without mercy, they shoved the estate's elderly butler aside and sent him crashing into the living room. The man slammed heavily onto the floor with a painful thud. His body was already covered with wounds, and blood stained his clothes. Gritting his teeth through the pain, the injured butler shouted desperately for the master to quickly order the lady to take the young master and escape while there was still time. The intruders sneered coldly and threatened to slaughter everyone present if they refused to hand over the scroll. They declared arrogantly that today would be the day the entire Lin family was wiped out. Ever since the death of Lin Shu, the Lin family had lost its position as the main fighting force within the city. The attackers mocked them openly, saying it was pointless for the Lin family to keep such valuable treasures anymore. They demanded the scroll be handed over immediately and sarcastically asked whether they planned to leave it to the last remaining member of the Lin clan. They pointed directly at Levi, the final heir of the Lin clan, who was rolling around on the ground like a madman and laughing loudly. His mother rushed toward him in panic, desperately screaming for him to run away. Hearing his mother's desperate voice telling him to stand up and escape quickly, Levi simply shook his head. Lying lazily on the ground, he refused to move and calmly declared that today he was nothing more than a dead dog. Seeing her son acting so foolishly in such a dangerous moment left Levi's mother completely helpless. Tears streamed down her face as fear and despair filled her heart. Suddenly, the old master spoke in a deep voice. Turning to the wounded butler Arthur, he asked calmly whether he was willing to stand beside him and fight in this final battle. Despite the blood dripping from his wounds, Arthur raised his voice with fierce determination. He declared that even if his flesh rotted away and his bones shattered, he would still fight alongside the old master until his final breath. The old master slammed his staff firmly into the ground. A powerful aura burst from his body, causing his clothes to flutter wildly even though there was no wind. With unwavering pride, he declared that the spatial scroll was the sacred inheritance of the Lin family. It had been passed down through generations, and even if he died today, he would never allow those shameless thieves to take it. The leader of the attackers narrowed his eyes, and a murderous light flashed within them. He muttered coldly that the old fool was truly stubborn beyond reason. One of his subordinates quietly warned him that the old man Yusef was once a powerful combat expert. If they fought recklessly, their group might suffer serious losses. Arthur himself was also a mid-level combat expert and was fiercely loyal to the Lin family. Facing two old warriors ready to die in battle would not be an easy task. Seeing that the long-haired man was hesitating, two figures approached him from behind. One of them, a woman named Carla, impatiently asked what he was afraid of. With so many fighters on their side, she was confident they could easily deal with two aging men on their last breath. The old master's anger finally erupted. He shouted at them fiercely, reminding them how the blood demon had once ravaged the entire city years ago. If his son Lin Shu had not sacrificed his life to stop that disaster, none of them would still be alive today. Carla sneered shamelessly. She admitted that if Lin Shu were still alive, she would never dare show her face here. But now that he was dead, leaving behind only a useless son, she questioned whether such a powerful martial scripture should really fall into Levi's hands. Hearing those insulting words, the old master cursed angrily and said that if things had reached this point, they might as well speak openly and honestly. He firmly refused to hand over the scroll and declared that today the Lin family would fight to the very end. None of them feared death. Turning toward his frightened daughter-in-law and grandson, the old master urgently told them to leave at once. The sudden appearance of the protective domain had already terrified them. When Carla's group began moving forward to destroy the domain and attack the old master, Arthur stepped forward with a furious roar. Standing like a shield before him, he growled that as long as he lived, no one would dare harm the old master. Carla immediately understood what the old master was trying to do. He was sacrificing himself to buy precious time for the others to escape. With cold determination, she ordered her fighters to destroy the domain immediately so that the young heir would have no chance of escaping. Levi's mother, Camilla, knew she could not allow the sacrifices of the old master and Arthur to be meaningless. She desperately grabbed Levi's arm and tried to drag him away from the chaos. But Levi stubbornly crawled along the ground, pushing her hand away again and again as if he refused to leave. He complained in a helpless tone that he didn't feel like walking at all. In fact, he grumbled that being dragged along like this made him feel like a dog being forced to crawl around on all fours. Hearing such nonsense in such a dangerous moment, Levi's mother finally lost her patience. Furious, she grabbed him tightly by the collar and, unable to hold back any longer, slapped him across the face and ordered him sharply to obey her and stand up. The sudden blow stunned Levi completely. Covering his face with both hands, he whimpered awkwardly, clearly embarrassed and confused, as if he still didn't fully understand what was happening around him. But then something strange happened. Levi's eyes suddenly widened, and the expression on his face slowly shifted. The excitement and confusion vanished, replaced by a cold, emotionless calm. He slowly pushed himself up from the ground and stood on his feet, absent-mindedly scratching his messy, dirty hair that hadn't been washed in a long time. Watching him like this, his mother suddenly fell silent. A trace of worry appeared on her face as she wondered if she had been too harsh with her stubborn and wayward son. In truth, something extraordinary had just happened. At that very moment, Levi's body had been taken over by another Levi from a different world, someone who had been given the mission of restoring this fallen boy to his former glory. Levi suddenly raised his voice and shouted loudly, asking where Jasper was and why he couldn't see him anywhere. Meanwhile, inside the protective domain created by the old master, A powerful impact suddenly struck it from the outside. The barrier shattered violently, collapsing under the heavy blow. A body was thrown through the broken domain and crashed down onto the ground, landing directly at Levi's feet. Levi looked down at the fallen figure with a puzzled expression and asked if it was Jasper. Ignoring the question, Yusef urgently shouted at him to stop standing there and run away immediately. Levi calmly replied that the old master was clearly badly injured. Once he found Jasper, he could have him use acupuncture to treat the wounds and stabilize his condition. As the enemy group continued advancing toward them, Arthur stepped forward without hesitation, choosing to sacrifice himself to stop them. With a powerful shout, he ordered the old master and the mistress to leave immediately. He knew very well that he wouldn't be able to hold the enemy back for long. When Arthur was killed right before their eyes, old Master Yusef cried out in heartbreaking grief, unable to accept the loss of his loyal companion. Arthur's blood splashed across Levi's face. Levi quietly raised his hand and wiped the warm blood away from his cheek. In that instant, Levi's expression changed again. His previously calm face became cold and serious. He spoke slowly and said that a group of people ganging up on one person was unfair and simply wrong. He even casually mentioned that he had once seen something like this on television, where people talked about the importance of proper fighting ethics. The attackers stared at Levi with cold, mocking expressions, clearly amused by his strange words. Carla couldn't help laughing out loud. She openly mocked Levi, calling him a fool who had clearly lost his mind. Levi shrugged casually and said they could beat him up if they wanted. It didn't matter to him because the pain would only help his cultivation grow stronger. The group's leader burst out laughing at such ridiculous confidence. Then he suddenly rushed forward, shouting that if he didn't obtain the scroll today, he would destroy the entire family. Seeing the enemy rushing toward Levi, both his mother and the old master screamed in horror. The attacker grabbed Levi roughly and lifted him up from the ground, clearly intending to crush his throat and kill him instantly. But suddenly, the man's expression changed to panic. He quickly released Levi when he heard a disturbing sound, the loud cracking of bones. The surrounding group stared in confusion and asked what had happened to his hand. Only then did they notice that his hand had been completely twisted and crushed. In fact, every single one of the 5 fingers on his hand had been broken. The people behind him exchanged shocked looks. They knew the man was a real martial arts expert, which made them wonder if Levi had been pretending to be stupid the entire time. Seeing the hesitation spreading among her companions, Carla quickly reassured them. Even if Levi had been acting all along, they still had to kill him to obtain the scroll. The injured man drew his sword and charged toward Levi again, determined to finish him. He slashed directly at Levi's shoulder, but the moment the blade struck, the sword shattered into fragments, leaving the attacker frozen in disbelief. Levi calmly told him that he didn't need anyone's help to cultivate anymore. At that exact moment, Levi seemed briefly distracted. Carla seized the opportunity and attacked him from behind with a powerful palm strike. Levi didn't even move. He simply stood there and received the woman's attack head-on without flinching. Carla's expression instantly turned pale with shock. Levi had somehow redirected the force of her attack, leaving her own arm twisted and injured instead. She screamed angrily, accusing Levi of pretending to be an idiot all this time just to deceive them. When Levi slowly turned his head and looked directly at Carla, the people behind her suddenly turned pale with fear. They couldn't understand how he had defeated Lady Carla without even launching a real attack. Some of them began to suspect that Levi had been tricking everyone from the very beginning. Realizing the situation was turning against them, the group decided to use their final desperate method against Levi. All of them rushed forward at the same time, hoping that overwhelming him with numbers would finally crush him. Watching this terrifying scene, Yusef and Camila cried out in fear, certain that their boy was about to die. But when the dust settled, Levi was still standing there unharmed. Meanwhile, the entire group of attackers had been violently thrown back, their bodies badly injured. One of the survivors muttered in disbelief that in the martial arts world, everyone believed Levi was nothing more than a fool. But in reality, old Master Yusef had carefully planned everything. He had deliberately hidden his grandson's true abilities from the world. Levi glanced back at the fallen attackers and quietly realized that all of them were already dead. With a calm voice, he thanked them, saying that no one except Jasper had ever helped him cultivate with such dedication before. He even added that they were truly great people for helping him grow stronger. Then Levi turned around and saw Arthur lying there on the brink of death. Arthur was trying weakly to speak to old Master Yusef. Only now did he realize that Levi had been pretending all along, and despite serving beside him for many years, he had never noticed the truth. Old Master Yusef quietly told Arthur not to say anything more and simply rest. Camila stood nearby, silently watching the emotional scene unfold before her eyes. With tears filling his eyes, Arthur asked the old master to take care of his granddaughter after he was gone. Yusef shouted in disbelief, refusing to accept that Arthur was truly dying. Seeing the sorrow in the old master's eyes, Levi suddenly asked whether he wanted Arthur to be revived. Shocked, Yusef quickly asked if such a thing was even possible. Levi replied that the voice in his head told him it could be done, but they would need a special medicine. At that moment, the system informed Levi that the store function had been unlocked and asked if he was willing to spend 2% of his accumulated energy to purchase the required item. Although Old Master Yusef didn't completely trust the mysterious medicine Levi handed him, he decided there was nothing to lose. Arthur was already dying anyway. The moment the liquid touched Arthur's lips, something unbelievable happened. Arthur suddenly roared loudly, jumped up, and asked where the enemies were, claiming he could easily defeat 10 of them at once. Yusef stood there in total shock. The medicine Levi had given them had turned out to be nothing less than a miraculous divine pill capable of reviving the dead. Meanwhile, the story shifted to a large mansion where the giant rooster had somehow ended up wandering. Somewhere within this strange and unfamiliar kingdom, the rooster stood quietly while countless confusing questions filled its mind. It had no idea how it had ended up in such a bizarre place. He stood there in confusion, wondering where exactly he had ended up. His mind raced with questions. How had he arrived here? And could this possibly be the mysterious kingdom those two strange villains had mentioned before? After thinking about it for a moment, the rooster decided those questions weren't the most urgent problem. The real issue bothering him was far more shocking. Why on earth had he suddenly turned into a human woman? The rooster could hardly believe such an absurd transformation had really happened. He was still trying to process the situation when the door was suddenly kicked open with a loud bang. A stranger stepped inside and asked suspiciously if this girl was really the same person they were looking for. The woman beside him nodded and calmly confirmed that it was indeed her. Before the rooster could even finish gathering his thoughts, a man named Hans suddenly rushed toward him at an alarming speed. Hans lunged forward without hesitation. Grabbing the rooster by the neck with a brutal grip, he lifted him into the air, making it painfully clear that he intended to kill him without mercy. Furious at being treated this way, the rooster felt rage surge through his chest. In his mind, he cursed the man and thought angrily that this fool was simply asking for his own death. He tried to unleash his powerful thunder breath ability to burn the man to ashes. But to his horror, nothing happened. He couldn't activate the skill at all. Panicking, the rooster quickly attempted to release his poison mist ability instead. Once again, however, the attack completely failed. Now truly alarmed, the rooster began desperately trying every ability he possessed. Yet no matter what he attempted, every single power refused to work. Hans frowned and angrily questioned the man standing behind him about how this girl had behaved before. The man nervously replied that he wasn't sure. Normally, Arthur's granddaughter never acted like this. He hesitantly suggested that perhaps Hans had frightened her so badly that she had lost her senses.